Welcome back to our music history moment. Today we get to Johann Sebastian Bach, who is considered to be one of the three greatest composers ever to live. Many argue the greatest. So this is a two-parter because it's many pages, because that's what he deserves. Mac is still distraught. So, enjoy. Johann Sebastian Bach. Just about everybody in the Bach family was a good musician, but nobody was better at it than Johann Sebastian. If you wanted to, you could trace the Bach family back through 5 generations, but you still couldn't find anybody to beat J.S. Various members of the Bach clan were organists, town pipers, and instrumentalists in Thuringia, a small state in the eastern part of what is now Germany. As far as being musicians, the Bachs had Thuringia pretty much sewn up. Johann Sebastian's great-great-grandfather, old Viet Bach, was a miller. He liked to play his lute while the millstones ground the flour in the background. J.S. later said it probably helped him to keep time. Johann Sebastian's father, Johann Ambrosius, married Elizabeth Lammerhirt, whose family were prosperous furriers and part-time mystics. Wow. Johann Ambrosius had a twin brother named Johann Christoph. They looked so much alike that not even their wives could tell them apart. Johann Ambrosius, or someone who looked just like him, and Elizabeth had 3 sons: Johann Christoph, Johann Jakob, and Johann Sebastian. How about that? Johann Sebastian was born on March 25, 1685, and baptized 2 days later at the little church of St. George's in Eisenach. At last report, that church still stands, and the present pastor still refers to that historic event whenever he baptizes a new little baby in the same font. Maybe he figures it will give them something to work towards. At age 8, little Sebastian was sent off to school, where he did considerably better than his older brother Johann Jakob. He was a good singer and was one of those pupils who always knew the answers to everything. Probably no one else liked him very much. His mother died when he was 9 and his father a year later, so Sebastian was shipped off to the little town of Ohrdruf to live with his brother Johann Christoph, who was an organist and a pupil of Johann Pachelbel. Pachelbel canon, the one who wrote the famous canon. Since money was scarce, it was soon decided to let little Sebastian to the choir school of St. Michael in Lüneburg. The rules stated that the singers had to be the offspring of poor people with nothing to live on but possessing good voices. He seemed to qualify on all counts, so off he went. The school paid for his tuition, room and board, and gave him candles and firewood. When his voice broke, we are told, Sebastian sang and spoke in octaves for a week. It must have been an interesting effect, but it didn't last. Anyway, Sebastian was kept busy after playing violin, viola, and organ. One of the ways Bach learned about music was to copy the compositions of his predecessors. He did a lot of this while at school. Nowadays we would call this plagiarism, but back then it must have been okay. Since photocopiers had not been invented yet, he had to do this by hand. Historian Cecil Gray says he absorbed all styles instead of being absorbed by them. Karl Geiringer says something similar. Young Sebastian absorbed all instruction as readily as a sponge does water. For a while, Bach studied organ at Lüneburg with Georg Bohm, who had been a pupil of a man named A.J. Reinken. Bach walked 30 miles to Hamburg to hear Reinken play. After arriving in Hamburg, Bach was hungry and tired from his long walk, but had no money for a meal. As he tells the story, he was just sitting outside an inn, minding his own business, thinking about food and rubbing his tired feet, when out from an open window were tossed 2 herring heads. And if that weren't enough, each fish head contained a Danish ducat. Now you tell one. Having studied hard and soaked up everything, it was time for Bach to get a real job. His first position was as organist and choirmaster of the little church of St. Bonifacius in Arnstadt. The choir members, all boys, weren't very good singers and were very rowdy. The young Bach had trouble keeping them in line. His bullish temper didn't help matters. He once got into a street brawl with one of his choristers, a boy named Geiser Bach, who called Bach a dirty dog. A little later, Bach asked permission from his employers to travel to Lübeck to hear the great Danish organist Dietrich Buxtehude. They weren't terribly keen on that idea, but they gave him 4 weeks off anyway. Bach set out, again on foot. It was more than 200 miles, but he made it somehow. Bach had a wonderful time in Lübeck and was thrilled to bits by Buxtehude's playing. Since Buxtehude was thinking of retiring, he offered his job to Bach, who was 20. The only catch was that Bach had to marry Buxtehude's daughter, Anna Margareta, who was nearly 30. This seemed perfectly reasonable to Buxtehude, since he had done exactly the same thing to get the job from his predecessor, Franz Tunder. Bach, however, was not so thrilled by the offer. He said thanks, but no thanks. 2 other great musicians of the time, Johann Mattheson and George Frederick Handel, also turned down the offer of the job, complete with the wife. It wasn't the sort of fringe benefit they had in mind. But one thing with one thing and another, Bach spent 4 months in Lübeck. When he got back to Arnstadt, the church authorities were a bit angry, to put it mildly. Furthermore, Bach had come back with all sorts of fancy ideas about playing hymn tunes with lots of extra notes and ornamentation. This annoyed the congregation, since they had trouble finding the melody. They told him to cut it out and keep things simple. So he did. Too simple. Bach wasn't keen on Buxtehude's daughter because he'd had an eye on someone closer to home. Very close to home, in fact. Her name was Maria Barbara Bach, and she was his second cousin on his father's side. She was an orphan living with her aunt and uncle. I've never said aunt ever. It's aunt. Some people say aunt. I don't. I've never said that before. Oh boy. Living with her aunt and uncle in a little house called the Golden Crown. Bach lived there for a while too, and that's how they met. It was convenient anyway. She was cute as a button and had a lovely soprano voice. Pretty soon the church authorities noticed that the 2 of them were spending a lot of time alone together up in the organ loft. They were only practicing their music, but that sort of thing makes church people nervous. So, all things considered, Bach decided it might be a good idea to move somewhere else. He and Maria Barbara got married and moved to Mühlhausen in a new church job. Bach's salary in Mühlhausen was 85 gulden a year, and 3 measures of corn, 2 trusses of wood, 1 of beech, one of oak or aspen, and 6 trusses of wood delivered at his door in lieu of arable. So, Bach is now grown up and married, and next week we will hear what happens after that. Have a lovely weekend. We'll see you soon.